Hey everybody, Tony D and Little Joan with a screenwriting tip. Uh, and this really applies for not only screenwriting, but general writing as well. I mean, I'm doing a lot of novels these days, so I think this applies. So the idea that, it's a little tough to formulate, but the idea I was wanted to talk about today was the idea of using the structure of the three act uh, screenplay to your best advantage. Um, so I had a college professor that back in college he said this, and I don't think he came up with the phrase, but it's a good phrase. It's all great art is unconscious, and I think what that phrase means is you really discover a story when you write it, or at least that's the best way. And I wasn't really aware of what that meant until I started doing improv. Because when you do improv, generally you start a scene and you and your scene partner just offer up any random couple of things, whatever it is, like, "Hey, how you doing? Nice tie," and you just go back and forth and you build upon the offers, and through those offers you discover what the scene's about, and it's very unconscious in that way. If you're doing improv, you're kind of just reacting and acting, and through those reactions you eventually discover that, I don't know, maybe somebody hates ties and has a deep-seated hatred of all things ties, and you would build upon that to some sort of crazy conclusion because it's an improv show and that's what you want. In writing a story, you use the structure, and the structure in improv is you're going to make you're going to discover something, you're going to heighten it, and then you're going to do three moves of it, heightening it each time to the end. So it's very much like the three act structure. So if you sort of break things up into a three act structure. Now with screenplays, the page count is fairly easy. It's about 30 pages for the first act, about 40 pages for the second act, and about 20 pages for the third act. And you don't want to be totally beholden to that, but you kind of want to sort of hit that general area in terms of the page numbers. You don't want to just cut it off at page 30 if you got a thought in your head or a sentence. And you also don't want to bang out an extra 2 pages just to get to page 30. That's about what it should be. With novels, generally I look at novels as prose versions of screenplays a lot of times, because when you look at adapting a novel to a screenplay, generally the kind of novels that I think make good screenplays are going to be around 120 pages, this is the novel, to about 250 pages. Depending on how dense it is. There's a lot of variables in that. Very, very dense novels, some of them are really untransferable. Like, I think Dune is one of those movies. I think Dune is so dense, even though I don't think the novel is, I think it is over 250 pages, if I'm remembering correctly. I think it hovers around 300 pages, I want to guess at. But it's very dense. There's a lot of stuff in there, and it's also a very alien world. And I was comparing that to Lord of the Rings with someone online, saying that when you look at Lord of the Rings, even though that's pretty dense too, there's a lot of relatable stuff in there. Like, even though it's a different kind of world, we all know what wizards and knights are, and even the elves. Like, it's within the realm of our experience. So it's, swords and horses, like, that's all grounded in reality. The alien world of Dune is so far afield. About the only thing in there that you could relate to is just the fact that they're human. But even the humans, the spice impacts them weirdly, and they gain all these sort of powers, and they have a culture. It's very alien. So it's so far removed from what you're used to. I think Dune really requires more of a mini series or a television series to explain even just the first book, much less the many books of Dune. Even though they're trying to make a franchise out of it now, and the word on the street is they're making it woke. So go figure. But if you use that sort of as your basis, like you kind of know the page length, you kind of know the first third is the first act, the second third is the second act, and it'll be a little bigger, and then the last act is going to be the last third of the book-ish, a little less than the second act in terms of page count. You can kind of gauge yourself, so you don't want to come up with every single event. You sort of want to discover those events, because the events that you discover along the way, and I tend to want an ending, or at least an idea of an ending, but as you're discovering things, writing the story, you're trying to get to the ending. Now, you don't want to get it to the ending too fast, so for the ending of, let's say, in my novel The Pineys, I wanted to have an ending in which the cousins kind of come together and set the stage for the other books. So I kind of knew that ending. I kind of knew that ending going into it. So you kind of want to start a story like that with the characters sort of far apart on that score, which I sort of did. I'm trying not to give away any elements of the story, but at least one of the cousins is sort of far afield from being in the regular group. And since I kind of knew where that was going, I started writing the book. And then once I got to that ending, I could then go back and sort of pepper in things that would make that ending more satisfying, right? And that's sort of the process of discovery. You sort of have an ending, and then you get in the car and you kind of drive to it. You really don't know the route you're going to take. As you're taking the route, you're discovering things along that route. And when you get to the end of the first draft, then you kind of look back down the road and say to yourself, how can I make this more interesting since now I know where I'm going? You feel me? So that structure, because you had that structure, because you knew in the first act you'd be as far away from the third act as possible, and then you'd put up all these roadblocks in the process to get there. And it's sort of like all these threads, right? The payoffs usually all come in the third act, maybe to some degree in the second act, but mostly in the third act. So you have all these threads, and then you get to the third act, and then you want all the threads to come together. Now, sometimes writers will either put too many threads that they can't pull together, or they will, I'm laughing at the dog, or trying not to laugh at the dog because she's looking at her bucket of toys now that I have something to do. But it is kind of easy to pull those threads together, as long as you don't have too many. And what I say about too many, well, that can vary from story to story. But, if you've got 50 different threads and every single character has a story to tell, it probably is too many. If you got a good, say, dozen threads and 2 or 3 of them are the main ones and the rest are all sort of like little mini threads that don't really matter, it's usually pretty easy to tie them all together. And you don't want to drop anything. I mean, you definitely don't want to drop anything. So anything, you get a toy and bring it to me. Anything you throw down, you want to pick up by the end of the, come here, the end of the story, regardless. You don't want to dismiss anything. You don't want to have like a dead end where you introduce this character and they say something that's seemingly very important and there's no payoff. There's got to be a payoff. Even if it's just a small sort of side character. If they're important enough, unless they say something really unimportant that anyone could have said, like, here's your jacket, sir, or, thank you for shopping here, stuff like that. Those are kind of throwaway lines, like if it's just a clerk or whatever. But if it's someone important and they say something seemingly important, you want some kind of payoff. Now I'm doing the Pineys, which is a novella series, so sometimes the payoff comes in the next book. I can sort of stretch those things out far and away. But with the actual main story and the main characters of that story, oh, she finally picked a toy. You want all those things to pay off as all those threads come back together. But initially, when you start the journey, you kind of just want to throw out interesting threads that could come together. So the other night I was working on the sequel to Wokistan, a novel, and I was just sort of, taking elements from the previous novel and kind of incorporating them into the current novel and the current situation, which is more about the entertainment industry. And the main character meets this other character, and it turned out that I needed them to have kind of a bonding experience. And when I created the reason for that bonding experience, it was instantly a good thing, because I realized that the two characters had something in common. They had a very good reason to bond, and that now this side character could become more important down the road when I get to the second or third act. So it's a process of discovery, your writing. So don't be so pressured, to do the right thing. Just do something. Just drive the car in a direction. Even if you feel like you're going in the wrong direction, keep going. Because and then you'll have to force yourself later to make it important. It may be difficult to do that, but that difficulty is also part of the process. If you have, a story in which the characters are going to end up in, I don't know, Washington, D.C., and you realize that in the first act, you have this character who desperately wants to be in, I don't know, Brazil, and you end up in Brazil for reasons that the story drove you there, but you need to be in Washington, D.C. by the end of this. You're just going to have to create a reason why the character has to be in Washington, D.C. It's just going to have to be there. And once you get to the third act and you sort of force yourself to create that reason, and then you see the entire journey from a new, fresh perspective, then you can go back and pepper in stuff earlier in the story that's going to make more sense when you do have to force them to go to D.C. You might have to, and you would analyze it, right? Like, you got this character, he desperately wants to go to Brazil, but you need him to be in Washington, D.C. at the end of the story. Why would that be? Well, the most obvious answer would be he's somehow involved in politics. And that would have to incorporate some kind of worldview. What does Brazil and Washington, D.C. have in common? Doggy. Stop. They kind of have a lot of doggy. They have a lot of crime. So maybe this person's a law enforcement officer. There are reasons. You just have to dig. Now, I have to get back to doggy, but that was my thought for today. So use that structure to build your story and discover things along the way. That's my summation. And now I'm going to take care of a noisy little dog.